Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Legionaries of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 249. We're covering Ad Gentes 10-11 on revealing Jesus' love to all people. I just want to make a slight note. I noticed when I was editing this one had several places where there were typos, like a period in the middle of a sentence and things like that. I'm assuming this is transcription errors from the printed version that they published back in the 60s to the digital version they published on the Vatican website. I apologize for this. I don't know what to do. This document seems to have more than others, and these particular paragraphs had like 2 or 3, which was very high for this small of an area. Just a note. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican and frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday we spoke about evangelizations to all nations, and thus in preparation for the second coming as it reveals Jesus to all people. So we're talking about that eschatological aspect. Today we're starting chapter 2, mission work itself, and we're talking about the church to reveal itself to all peoples, and this starts with Christians living among them as witnesses. So paragraph 10 is all before the articles in this chapter, and paragraph 11 starts the first article, Christian Witness. So let's read paragraph 10. It doesn't have subparagraphs, so the summary of paragraph 10 is the church to reveal Christ to all peoples of earth, many of whom don't know him. So let's read it. There's no A there, sorry. The church sent by Christ to reveal and to communicate the love of God to all men and nations is aware that there still remains a gigantic missionary task for her to accomplish. For the gospel and the message has not yet, or hardly yet, been heard by 2 million human beings, and their number is increasing daily, who are formed into large and distinct groups by permanent cultural ties, by ancient religious traditions, and by firm bonds of social necessity. Some of these men are followers of one of the great religions, but others remain strangers to the very knowledge of God, while still others expressly deny his existence and sometimes even attack it. The church, in order to be able to suffer all of them the mystery of salvation, the life brought by God, must implant herself into these groups for the same motive which led Christ to bind himself in virtue of his incarnation to certain social and cultural conditions of those human beings among whom he dwelt. So here we go. The church wants to reveal Jesus to all, and there's all these people. So the text says million, and that's what I read, but I think it means 2 billion people in the world. And it realizes there's large areas of these 2 billion people that are not known. Now we have 7 billion people, and we'll probably top out pretty soon in the next 2 or 3 decades at most. We'll top out at like 8 billion or 8 or 9 billion. I forget the exact numbers. Maybe we're at 8, we're topping out at 9. I forget the exact numbers, but that idea. There's a few billion people on Earth, single-digit number of billions, and it's increased since the time of this writing. But there are large swaths of this planet where Jesus is not known or barely known. And I think barely known can also think of large swaths of the world where it's termed Muslim, because Muslims know that Jesus is a prophet, but they don't really know him as he truly is. Because yes, you can get some things teaching him as a prophet or a good moral teacher, but that's not who Jesus is. Jesus is God. And so we need to have people come to know him fully as he is, God and man. And we need to grow in those areas. They grow up in these areas where they don't know Jesus and as he is, and we have to say, okay, what are we going to do about these people? This is where we need missions, where these people are not growing up learning about Jesus. And how are we going to do this? It's talking about how the church must go into such groups and make salvation manifest, right? Jesus went into the people of ancient Israel, and he made salvation manifest to them in their time and place and things like that. And how are we going to do that today? That's what this whole chapter is about. So moving on to paragraph 11, which starts Article 1 on Christian Witness. It has 2 subparagraphs, and these subparagraphs are A, Christians need to be witnesses in culture as a first step of mission, and B, living among others, Christians should manifest the treasure of the faith. So let's read A. A, the church must be present in those groups through her children who dwell among them or who are sent to them. For all Christians, whether they live, are bound to show forth by the example of their lives and by the witness of their word, the new man put on at baptism and that power of the Holy Spirit which they have been strengthened at confirmation. Thus other men, observing their good works, can glorify the Father, confirm Matthew, and can perceive more fully the real meaning of human life and the universal bond of community of mankind. As I was reading that, I noticed I skipped a typo there because I just said confirm Matthew. It has letters there instead of numbers. So I didn't double check which numbers those are because it's obviously not the chapters in Matthew are numbered. But the idea here is that Christians become present in all these cultures, that dwell among them. That's the first stage of witness. We show that transformed life. People are not going to necessarily believe in this abstract thing, but when they see these people with a transformed life, that could be the first steps of mission. And that's why the church has always had that idea of sending missionaries out as witnesses, send them out and living among these people, not saying, hey, you got to come to our culture and then you'll know Jesus. No, let's show Jesus in your culture. If you ever read the stories of Isaac Jogues and Jean de Brebeuf in to the Hurons and the Iroquois in Eastern North America, they're perfect examples of that. Very heroic stories, very good examples. And others can glorify God if they see these holy Christians. If we give this witness, it can help for others to glorify God. So let's continue on with paragraph B, talking about living among others. Christians should manifest the treasure of the faith. B, in order that they may be able to bear more fruitful witness to Christ, let them be joined to those men by esteem and love. Let them acknowledge themselves to be members of the group of men among whom they live. Let them share in cultural and social life by the various undertakings and enterprises of human living. Let them be familiar with their natural and religious traditions. Let them gladly and reverently lay bare the seeds of the word which lie hidden among their fellows. At the same time, however, let them look to the profound changes which are taking place among nations, and let them exert themselves to keep modern man, intent as he is on the science and technology of today's world, from being a stranger to things divine. Rather, let them awaken in him a yearning for truth and charity which God has revealed. Even as Christ himself searched the hearts of men and led them to divine light, so also his disciples, profoundly penetrated by the Spirit of Christ, should show the people among whom they live and should converse with them, that they themselves may learn by sincere and patient dialogue what treasures a generous God has distributed among the nations of the earth. But at the same time, let them try to furbish these treasures, set them free, and bring them under the dominion of God their Savior. So this is really talking about how we go and witness these people. So it's not just being in the same country, being in the same place, but really witness into their things, be present in their lives. Acknowledge their cultural and social life they live in, understand their nation, understand their religion, understand their culture and things like that. Sometimes people ask me about certain things about other cultures and how they practice Catholicism, and often I have to say, I don't understand their culture sufficiently to have a good answer. And that's important to understand, that we may not understand these cultures, and these cultures can have differences that do not make them un-Catholic. There's a whole bunch of differences that you'll have in cultures of social norms and things like that. And the church does not say, oh, you have to have North American social norms to be a Christian. No. You don't have to have, for example, when I started working in the U.S., it was kind of awkward. I'd go into people's houses and they would tell me to keep my shoes on. When I was in Canada, if I was going to someone's house, I'd always take my shoes off. That was like the first thing you do when you enter a house. And neither of those is wrong. It's just a different cultural practice. That's obviously a very simple one, a very kind of superficial one where cultures that are very similar have the difference. But even in bigger differences in culture, they aren't necessarily one's Christian, the other one's unchristian, but we have to figure out how to enculturate, how to live Christianity in each of them. And so we also have to realize today the changes that are happening. We have cultures that are going very much in the science and technology, and how those are changing culture, how those are becoming a part of culture. We have today very much the social media, the kind of laptops and cell phones and all those types of things, and it's important. And so we should enter into as Christ did. What did Christ do? He came to Galilee, he came to the Holy Land, and he presented the parables as they were. We have the parables of fishing, of herding, of sheep, and things like that. It would be great if somebody wrote a bunch of parables today of modern versions of it. We see it, for example, depending on how you want to argue it was written, but I would argue that Beowulf may have undergone some kind of transition there to really make Beowulf this kind of figure, this Christ figure, as the leader of God's soldiers. And that's an example of enculturation. Obviously, enculturation is a very different culture. I'm not going to talk about the Anglo-Saxons of 800 the same as today, but that is the idea. So thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarCrest produce it and other great podcasts. at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time monthly to join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow, we're going to continue with the next paragraph of Ad Gentium, which is paragraph 12 on missions in natural human groups. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which can provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information on the podcast, like playlists for individual documents and a reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X.
Amen.